our moderator for this evening. Ibarionex is a dear friend of the Los Angeles Center of Photography. Um, he serves on our board of advisors, and he's been an educator here for many, many years. But just to read some of his credits, Ibarionex is a writer, educator, and a photographer, and he's also the host of the Candid Frame podcast. He has over 25 years of experience in the photo industry. His role in host and producer of the Candid Frame provides frank, insightful interviews with some of the industry's top established and emerging photographers. The popular show has featured guests including Jay Mizell, Joel Meyerowitz, Pete Turner, and Lynn Goldsmith, and Garrett Ludwig, just to name a few. The weekly program is consistently ranked one of the top program of its type. Ibarionex is also the author of 6 books, including Chasing the Light, Improving Your Photography Using Available Light, 5D Mark III, From Snapshot to Great Shots, and Adobe Masterclass Photoshop. His latest book is Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. All right, so it gives me great pleasure. I'm going to turn the floor over to my dear friend, Ibarionex. Take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Brandon. And thanks to the LACP team, not only for tonight, but for all the work that they do in putting this this event together. Even though it's virtual, I know that's still a lot of work that's put into making this happen. So congratulations and thank you for it. Tonight is really special. You have some amazing photographers from which you have you'll have a chance to learn from. And each of them, a good part of their work was done in the city of New York. And New York is probably one of the most significant cities in the history of street photography, just from the very beginning. And you know, but all 3 of these photographers have been photographing there for a while, as you'll see when you get to see the work. So it's interesting to see New York not only through the span of time, but different neighborhoods, different communities, different peoples and different cultures of the city. Sometimes they were happening simultaneously. I don't know how well the photographers knew each other when they were creating the work, but each sort of played a role in documenting the history of that city long before it became Disneyfied. One of the fascinating things about street photography in New York is that a lot of people think, well, New York City, yeah, it's a great city to do street photography, but there's so many photographers out there. What can I possibly do that's new? And I think that these photographers sort of exhibit, even though they had the same streets, the same light, with which to work, that they each managed to put their own personal stamp on how they saw the city that was as much a part of them, and it wasn't just about a place to go and make photographs. And I think that one of the things that's getting lost now is, especially in the age of Instagram, that people see destinations as a place to simply make a photograph, whether it's a selfie for Instagram or for something that they're going to pad their portfolio with. And I think what makes the photographs, you know, of Meryl, Gerald, and Richard so special is that they're sharing their personal experience of a place and of a people. And as you look at that work, think about that, because it's not just about what lens they used, what camera they used, what kind of light they used. And if you really want to appreciate their work, get their books. You know, Meryl's new book, New York Paradise Lost, is just amazing. I had the pleasure of interviewing her recently for it, but Gerald's Stormy Sunday and Richard's The Eyes of the City are great books. And there's nothing like having the pleasure of having one of those books in your lap and slowly taking it in. Because if you want to learn from a great photographer, you got to linger. And tonight, you'll get to see it and you'll get to hear from them, which is double the fun. So I'm going to sit back and enjoy this. And remember, you can post questions that you have in the chat, and then we'll address them at the end of each person's presentation, after the presentation of all three. So Meryl, you'll be leading off, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Okay, the first my first camera, the Adventurer, got it at age 7. Okay. Inspirations. We're all inspired by other people, but not the first of anything. My dad was a printer by trade, but he was a passionate photographer. And here's some of his pictures when he's out in your end of the country, out west, in the postcard. And that's little Meryl on the lap of my mother there. And I've just recently gone through his negatives and realized I got this street photography thing from my dad. That's my dad's photograph of his father, Murray. Murray's kind of like Vivian Meyer. You know, he's photographing constantly, but maybe we saw 2 of his pictures and nobody knows what they are, but just the act of doing it was enough. My first street photos, family and friends, school trips, never changed. When I was like 21, I saw the show of Dion Arbus at MoMA, and I was moved, just moved. And so when I decided to enroll in a photography class when I was going to University of Wisconsin, and there I was exposed to, these are the people who are most significant to me. Henri Lautique, Helen Levitt, Versailles, Lizette Modell. I seem to be skipping things. In 1975, I moved to New York to study Lizette Modell. I know this sounds really weird, but somehow it's skipping. Okay. Yes, I was a CETA photographer for the American Jewish Congress, photographing Jewish New York. The only time I made a living as a photographer. And after CETA ended, I was quite unemployed. And so I decided to make use of my college degree, art education. And I became a New York City public school teacher from 1979 until June 2010, I retired. And I've always been showing my work, and I started digging a little earlier, but then I was not working full time. And some of my friends were the inspiration. I'm friends with Arlene Gottfried. She was digging through her work. I knew Rebecca Lepkoff, a family relationship, Ruth Gruber. And then, of course, in the midst of all of my looking, the story of Vivian came out, and I sure related, but I was alive. Okay. Got into inspiration in a drag and burlesque bar in Bushwick that my photographs while I was teaching in Bushwick and my disco work, they belong together. It's a long story, but I knew they were the same sides, opposite sides of the same coin of life and my life in New York City. And this book was my first book in 2014. And I put together my disco photographs with my photographs of Bushwick. And they seem to be just meant to be together because they were split seconds in time. So the village people, kids on the street. Didn't matter if one was black and white, medium format, the other one was a point and shoot camera, it's the same vision. And then just some of the street photos from that book. And they're all like within the same block or two. because I was working in the neighborhood 14 years. My disco life was shorter. And a lot of these people have come back into my life, which is quite sweet. Next book, I want to show where I came from, why I saw the same way I did. So it's talking about Long Island, suburbia, and New York City that I moved to, where I come from and where my new home was. So CBGB's, Cousin on the Toilet, Easter Parade. I was also, besides being a teacher, I was working go-go bars at nighttime. So I did get a firsthand view of some underground scenes. I took my camera everywhere I went. It could be Fire Island, the subways. And the newest book, New York Paradise Lost, Bushwick Era Disco. The first book I didn't know was going to really happen. And I held a lot back and I hadn't really looked through it all. And I needed to go through this work to move on. And there's my little point and shoot. What was around me, around my school building. And things just seem to go together. Now, the fact that Bushwick ended up becoming a hot neighborhood with a lot of artists moving into it and all these things happening was a real lifesaver for me, because I didn't know that I have this history that no one else seems to have. And what's different about this book, besides different images, is that I go inside the school. And there's lots of pictures in the school. Well, this is a street photography show, so we'll concentrate on street photography. But there's, you know, the school life. And do things really change? I mean, look, T-shirt, stop killing the Black youth. What's changed? Not enough. We seem to be going backwards. And if I didn't dig again, because I knew I needed to go through as many boxes I could, I never would have found this image. And I'm glad that made it all worthwhile. Or this one, the snowstorm. What's very satisfying for me is that through Photoville this past year, I had an installation of the pictures I took in Bushwick from within the school that I taught, and the streets around it were installed on the actual schoolyard fence. So it felt like full circle, right up there with, like, if tell me I had to show at the Brooklyn Museum. It felt that important to me that they were back where they belong. And now they've taken down their part of the school's history inside the school. And there's just so much. All of us, we have a lot, and I'm still looking. You know, I've not published yet. But for example, digging deeper, I didn't even know I had a photograph of Marsha P. Johnson. I didn't know it was her. I just knew it was someone I photographed, and someone else pointed it out. Do I still photograph? Oh yeah, during the pandemic, talking about dark rooms, Richard, I built a dark room in my basement. I was having some shows coming up. I didn't have access anymore. Okay, going full load. and it's a photograph taken in the 70s on the left, and then in one disco in the 70s, and this is the House of Yes in Bushwick. Seems the same to me, or very similar. I do use my phone to take photos when I don't have a real camera on me, or my cameras break. So these are some phone, because the conversation of the night was how would people think about that. So phone's on me. Just a few weeks ago was Purim, and I don't tend to go out to photograph, but in 1978, I went to Purim in the Hasidic area of Brooklyn. And I said, okay, pandemic's slowing down. I want to go out. I want to do the things. So I purposely wanted to go back to Purim, but cameras even the one I had fixed seemed to be out of commission again. And it was a rainy day. So I brought my phone. I just wanted to go anyway. So these are phone photos. And I'm with another photographer friend, we're both, who didn't know what Purim was, had never heard of it. I mean, it was a total foreign experience for her. Purim's like, for those who know, Purim's like Mardi Gras. Every tradition has its similarities. But I'm back. I finally got one of my medium format cameras back in action again this past weekend. And so I've been photographing all along, but this is just from this past weekend. And so this is, I photograph sneakers in this classroom. It's like, what's the difference between shoes and the subway? And it's actually right outside my gallery. Just, it seems like yesterday is today. Or, I'm comfortable asking a couple kissing, and they said yes. And a woman writes to me, and I look at her website. Yeah, she photographs weddings. No wonder she was comfortable having me photograph them kissing. And then seeing, a Sweet 16, all dolled up there on Central Park. Amazing. Not very different from my self-portrait, my ballerina outfit, right? It's the same. Okay, this crowd is not newbies, but in case there's anyone who is, I seem to have a sticky finger on my keyboard. My style, everyone's different or similar. I usually ask permission. I don't usually go to photograph, but I did for Purim. I photograph where I'm going. I look for things that are familiar, or something I've never seen before. You just do what's right for you. And I've realized that's for me, it's a form of memoir, and time has helped me with editing its perspective. And who knew that I'd find inspiration in a restroom of a drag burlesque house in Bushwick, and most important, find supportive people, community. Just be yourself. Ta-da! Thank you.
That's amazing, Meryl. I always love seeing your work. In part of your presentation, you showed pairings of images from different periods and things like that. Talk to us about how you find those relationships. Do you physically make small prints and put them on the floor, on a table, or on a wall? And how do you make those discoveries to realize that two images really resonate and they benefit from each other rather than just being a single photograph?
Well, the first time I did it was for the first book, and it became an option. Someone wanted to publish my work, and I was familiar with a lot of my Bushwick works because I'd shown it. I had never shown my disco work, and I was literally taking negatives up and putting them to the light and saying, "Oh, that's a match. That's a match." I was doing it in my little head like that, and I did make some little prints and put them together. But a lot of it was just a digitally side-by-side Lightroom. The second two books, well, first I look for strongest photographs. That's number one. But then going through this I was like, that goes, like playing the game, match game. And so for the second two books, I made 8x10 prints and I laid them out because I wanted to work more with the sequencing, or I put them in pages and try different orders. Gave it more serious thought. So whatever, so it's a combination of digital, small prints, and up to 8x10 prints.
Great. Thank you so much for that.
Welcome.
And again, if people have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll take as many as we can at the end. Next, we have Gerald Cyrus. So Gerald, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm just going to show sort of a broad spectrum of work. I did get the memo about making it mainly about New York, so sorry about that. I have a few things from New York, but it's mainly work that I've shot other places, but all of it on the street ever since I started photography. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so I'm originally from LA and started photographing in the early 80s. And ever since I started photography, I've been taking my camera on the street. I became familiar with the work of people like Roy de Carava and Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, Andre Cortege. So, you know, I'd go out mainly in South LA. I grew up in the Leimert Park area neighborhood. So, and I lived in further, you know, down near Gardena. So it was mainly South LA I would shoot around, but also here downtown LA, the old Olympic Auditorium. But I just took my camera around and, you know, I was trying to learn the medium and learn how to use a camera and get everything in focus and get it sharp and work with black and white film. You know, this was sort of the process of learning how to work on the street. I always was somewhat frustrated looking at all these great images from New York or from Paris and Cartier-Bresson because there just aren't very many people in LA on the street. So you'd walk and walk and walk, and once in a while you'd come across something. But you know, I long to be able to be on the street surrounded by activity. So eventually I did get to New York in the early 90s. This is obviously Hollywood Boulevard. You can see the Walk of Fame. This is also in South LA. This image always kind of struck me because it is a guy riding a horse in South Central LA. You can see, like, I think that's like the 105 freeway, I think it's now called, under construction. You know, you got palm trees on the left, you got the mountains way in the distance on the right. So this sort of like encapsulates for me a lot of what everything that LA is, all these contradictions sort of coming together. And then of course, you remember from the Rodney King uprising in '92. So this is things that you would see again, South LA. So every time I come back to LA, I do, you know, try to get around, walk around and photograph. This is a later photograph in the 2000s. I was struck by all the murals in LA and the iconography, you know, and you sort of have like this living history of LA that's painted on the side of buildings, the stuff that's not necessarily taught in history books, but people commemorate it in murals and whatnot. So this is obviously an homage to the Black Panthers. It's painted on the side of a barber shop. This is a mural that's right across the street from the high school I went to, Crenshaw High. And this is another mural in South LA. So it's a lot of what I notice and what I'm picking up on when I come back to LA and photograph is a lot of this iconography that that people paint to sort of plant their stake in the ground, right? This is who we are, and this is our space. Right. So I did move to New York in 1990 and to Harlem in 91. And this is when I first started using a medium format camera, Rolleiflex. So this is a different way of working. You know, you get so much more space at the top of the frame with the medium format, or 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. So I trying to figure out how to utilize that space. And I was inspired by the history of Harlem, all the art, photography, literature, music. I mean, Harlem was such a mecca for Black arts in the early 20th century and then on up to current period. So inspired by that, as well as the history of activism and whatnot. Yeah, so just walking around and whatever I encountered and just trying to make an interesting photograph. This is one of the few times when I saw something and didn't have my camera and ran home and got it, just so I could hurry up and get back, hopefully before somebody came and got their coat. But I just walked by this and you just saw it didn't apparently belong to anybody that I could discern, but I just walked by this and this coat was hanging on a pole in front of a metal grate. And so it just struck me again, the sort of the oddity of it. And it almost kind of reminds me of a blues song, that aspect of it. I think Meryl was talking about going back in your archive and finding stuff. So this is an example of that. I don't know why I didn't print this around the time that I shot it, but somehow going back through old negatives and I noticed this and immediately it's like, wow, that's to see these two really muscle-bound dudes and just the tenderness with which the guy on the left is caring for, I assumed, is his child, and then there's another small child. And so there's just, again, kind of wonderful quality about it that has really struck me. And again, one of the things I like walking around in these neighborhoods, just the way people utilize their space, and whether it's storefronts, murals, I don't know, it might be someone's homeless space on the sidewalk, but the way they make that space theirs. And so I'm just really, fascinated by a lot of that stuff. And this is just a beauty shop storefront I photographed. All right, so I moved to Philadelphia in 2000. And one of the places I noticed, I was struck by, was the city that's right across the Delaware River, Camden, New Jersey. And so I was really struck by just this dichotomy between the riverfront, which was highly developed, right? You had a minor league baseball stadium, you had the New Jersey Aquarium, you had a concert venue. But as soon as you got out of that riverfront area, you just saw these devastated neighborhoods. And so I was really, I don't know, I hadn't seen anything on that sort of like small of a scale before. So I went over there and started photographing, but I also, again, decided to try something new in terms of a camera format. So this is my first foray into large format photography, utilizing Polaroid film. Polaroid used to have a film where you could not only get an immediate positive print, but you would get a negative that you could keep and print in the darkroom. And so that's where that's how I made these images. And so I could immediately give the person that posed for me a print, and then I could take the negative back and then make my own prints. So a lot of this, I hadn't gone over there with the specific intent of making street portraiture, but that everybody was fascinated by this old Crown Graphic camera that I had. And so they'd walk up to me and ask me what I was doing. And just through those interactions, I ended up taking a lot of these photographs. And then I'd follow them back home and photograph the rest of their family and whatnot. So that's how a lot of these came about. I really didn't tell anyone how to pose or anything. We may have found a space that I liked and thought was good, but other than that, I let them give me whatever they wanted to give me in terms of their pose or attitude. And this is what she gave me, and I never would have imagined that I would have gotten that look from her when she posed. But again, this is one of the wonderful things about photography, in terms, especially street photography, is you can't imagine the things you're going to encounter. And that's what makes it so wonderful to me, because I couldn't, a lot of the things I photographed, I never could have dreamt them before they happened. All right. So this is more recent work. I had the opportunity to go to Havana in 2016 as part of a group from School of Visual Arts in New York. And so this is the first real project I did in digital photography. Everything else you've seen before this is shot on film, right? But I decided to, I was going to go and shoot these images in Havana with digital camera. And so they're still black and white. that's I have shot in color before, but there's something about black and white that reaches me on a very visceral level, right? And so that's what really just moves me. And so I can appreciate great color photography. And like I said, I've shot plenty of color photography myself, but the black and white is the stuff that really sort of like gets underneath my skin. So these are shot digital and converted to black and white. So we talked about Ibarionex was talking about New York, all the great street images that have been taken in New York. I would place also like Paris on that level too. So much great street photography has happened in Paris. And there's a reason why. There are just some places are just more receptive to people being on the street and photographing than other places, right? You can walk around with a camera in New York and people they don't think twice about it because, of course, you want to photograph New York. It's a great city. Who wouldn't want to photograph New York? So nobody is really struck or freaked out by someone having a camera. I felt the same way about Havana. I was able to walk around very freely and take photographs, and nobody really questioned what I was doing. And so that was really rewarding to me, you know, really intriguing, you know, because again, you think about Havana and you think in terms of a lot of, what do I think, surveillance, right? But I didn't get that sense. Yeah, so a lot of these were just walking around in the old Havana. There's also another thing about certain places that strike me, and it's the quality of light, right? Like I can see an image of LA and almost just strictly from the light, I know it's LA, right? Havana has this really striking light that pours in and strikes these old structures, and it's really just fascinating. Right? And of course, you have the old cars. I tried not to get too taken away with all the old cars. You know, it's something it is really fascinating when you see all these old 50s and 60s, even sometimes 40s automobiles rolling up and down the street. Mm-hmm. But I tried not to get overcome with that and just approach it the way I would any other place. Oh yeah, so this is just right after the island had been opened up to the internet, right? So you saw a lot of people congregating in spaces that had a hotspot. So a building that might have a hotspot, which is you'd see this a crowd of people often with their phones, because this is how they would be able to use the internet. The famous Malecon, the seawall. Shay. All right, and then recently, been walking around a lot in my area here in Philly, and and just sort of trying to make more work here. All right. I've gone to all these other places and shot, but have not really, 20 years really made a significant body of work here in Philly. So trying to think more about that and just walk around these different areas, returning to 35 millimeter film for most of these. But I'm just thinking about the way these neighborhoods are changing, and just again, how people sort of tag their space in this case, right? And just all these little oddities you come across just walking the streets and trying to make visually compelling images. Yeah, there's a lot of gentrification going on in Philly, as in just about every other big city. So. I don't know how many of you know about the tradition of like bottle trees from the South, but this is an art piece, but it's in those that sort of Southern tradition of people hanging bottles from trees in the South as a way of sort of capturing spirits, what have you. And of course, these signs are prevalent all over Philly. So some neighborhoods more than others, but we buy houses. So the gentrification is in full effect. And that's it.
Gerald, those are great.
Thank you.
What's interesting in seeing the work is I saw a direct connection between the stuff that you're doing now in Philly and the stuff you were doing in LA.
Okay.
I just, it's the way that you experienced the place. I looked at those and it's almost, you could have taken those pictures in either city. And I think I think one of the things that's kind of interesting with respect to seeing a city in the way that you're doing is that it's not as reliant on people to make the shot. Suggestion of people is still there.
Right.
So when you go out to shoot, can you speak about the mindset? Do you go out with a blank slate? How do you know when you're seeing something that it's worthy of being photographed, especially if people aren't in there to provide that flourish?
Right. I don't know. It's almost kind of like intuitive at this point. I don't question myself too much about it. If I come across something and it sort of like tweaks my interest, I photograph it. Now, when I look over the contact sheet later, or if it's a digital image when I'm looking through them on Lightroom, that's that's crap. So, but okay, so you just move on. But you just you sort of just feel your way through it. It has been kind of challenging in the sense that I love photographing in places where sort of like life is lived on the street, right? And you have your sort of street theater there. But there are a lot of places that aren't like that, but can still be interesting to photograph because, like you said, the presence of people can still be felt even if they aren't actually there in the picture. And so again, the idea about the way people tag their space, maybe murals and maybe graffiti, it may be just the way they organize that space or something, but they're taking ownership of that. And how do they do that? And can that be an interesting picture? So, those are some of the things I think about, storefronts, and you see the same kind of mannequins and signs and messages painted, right? So these are all kind of like manifestations of a culture, right?
Right.
All these little things can add up to culture. And so I'm just trying to identify them and how do you make an interesting picture out of it, right? Because in the end, that's got to be what it has to be to begin with, to draw somebody's interest into the photograph. How do you make an interesting photograph out of that? But yeah, that sort of iconography really fascinates me,
Yeah, and it's just as important in an aspect of street photography as anything that's made with a people in it.
Right.
You can look at the work of Walker Evans, who, you can debate whether or not he was a street photographer. I say he was.
Yeah, right.
But you look at his work, and it's very analogous to what you're doing in
Right.
terms of signage and space, and especially a place in a particular moment in time. And
Exactly. And here's something I learned over 30 some years of being involved in photography. These things become history whether you intend them to be or not. When I was photographing Harlem, I had no idea that was the last era before gentrification hit full force in the early 2000s. And so many of the places I photographed disappeared, particularly all these nightclubs and bars I used to go to. And of course, you spoke about Stormy Monday, my book of jazz photographs from Harlem. But I never dreamed that those places were about to disappear. And so that's the thing that's also sort of like, it's on my mind as I go to photographing these places in Philadelphia. How long will they be around? We don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So you almost become a documentarian by default.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, Gerald, thank you so much, man. Really
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right. And now we have Richard Sandler. Take it away, man.
Okay. So I'm born in New York City, and in 1968, I moved to Boston and had 2 careers in Boston. And at age 31, decided that I wanted to do something else, and that was photography. So I learned in Boston, and the people that mentored me obviously were there. So I just hit the streets in Boston, and I don't really have these, I'll point them out to you as we go along. But these are pictures that was the cover of my book, The Eyes of the City. It was published in 2016. So for starting in 1977 until 1992 and up to 2001, I pretty much photographed every day. I had the camera with me every day. Was always looking for pictures. And I guess you could say that what I was doing was, observing certainly where I lived, but there was definitely a quality of social critique in what I was doing. In Boston, I was able to get work pretty quickly doing photojournalistic assignments. So photojournalism played a big part in my early street shooting. There's obviously the World Trade Center from the Kosciuszko Bridge. Being a New York kid and growing up on the subways, I felt very comfortable there. singing in doo-wop groups when I was a kid, and you know, I took New York. I inhaled it. You know, I really loved being a New York kid. It was really a lot of fun. Anyway, so in '80, I moved back to New York City, and then began shooting every day in New York. Prior to that, I would make trips down to the city from Boston to shoot in New York, because it was pretty clear that Boston was, Boston was, you know, nowhere near as interesting as New York City's streets were. So yeah, most of these photographs that you're seeing here were shot in the '80s in New York, not posing anybody, not asking any questions, certainly not asking permission, approaching street photography from, you know, from my process was to be very quick, to be very stealth, to be very invisible, and to you know, be, you know, very stealth, and try to analyze the situation and find out where's the place to shoot from, where's the perfect place to shoot from, both on the subway, of course, and on the street. And from the very beginning, the people that mentored me taught me how to use the flash. And so from day one, literally, I was using the flash on the camera or off the camera, extending the shutter speed to create this blurring effect, which is the blur is the ambient exposure, and then the sharp part of it is the flash going off at the end of that ambient exposure. Some cameras, it's at the beginning of that exposure. In my case, it was the end. Because I was using a Leica. So using the flash on the street is a whole nother trip. And we could talk about that, but I'll just keep moving along with, you know, with the photographs. This is an early one from maybe, I think, '82. This is one of those situations where, you know, you really got to be fast. And I grew up an athlete. I played a lot of ball. You know, I had a good quick first step, shall we say, you know. And so I maybe made 2 frames before that, which were also not bad, but I realized that this woman was in the middle, was standing at the point of what looked like 2 triangles to me. And so I shot 1 more frame, and luckily it was this one. So matters of race, matters of class, matters of gender, you know, all formed the gestalt, I guess, of my, you know, sort of social critique on some level. But I tried to leave that at the door. I tried to make pictures where I would say to myself, where something would go off in my head that would say, wow, look at that. And if that happened, I would photograph. And if it didn't, I, you know, occasionally would push it, but inevitably it was the pictures that you know, I had an immediate response to, an organic, a gut response to, moments that I had a gut response to. And, you know, if it told, you know, my interest was always in telling stories, in pictures that had enough information that they existed on their own, but that they had, you know, enough mystery, perhaps, that you could make your own narrative out of them. You know, just the general, you know, obvious, you know, sort of male with the briefcase walk down the street, the crotches, no faces. You know, I'm trying to be somewhat ironic, I guess. But there's so much beauty, and there's particularly in the subways, because the light was so interesting in those days, because the subway was, I should say, the stations were lit in a much more beautiful way than they are now, sort of noirish. And this one I like to speak about because there's an aspect of it that is an accident. They are holding hands. They are looking at each other in a sort of tender way. But the reason why the eyes are closed, if you can see that, is because the train is pulling out of the station and kicking up dust. So their eyes were closed, and so it added to the moment, but in reality, it was only because of the dust. But the thing with photographs is it's what you see, you know, it's not what's actually happening, it's what the photograph looks like. The photograph itself is a thing in itself now. It has, in this case, it has partially to do with the moment, but it's a response to something that's happening that you would never know because you can't see the dust. This one was really, really a joy to discover in my archive. I didn't see it for maybe 5 or 10 years, maybe 12 years. I walked onto this train and I stood where I'm standing, and the door was closed. I mean, sorry, the door was open. So I had no idea that the window that's in front of this lovely couple, you know, about to kiss on the platform, I had no idea whatsoever that the broken window would be right on their faces. But then the door closed. I took one picture with the door open, and I hadn't seen the door, so I didn't know. I didn't really know I didn't know it was there. And then the door closed, and I just was, you know, amazed that that happened. And so it's such a beautiful moment. And again, this is one of those pictures that, you know, you can construct the narrative any way you like. I did find out that the guy on the right with the shades on the right was a physics teacher at Bronx High School of Science, because somebody ID'd him as his teacher. But again, you know, just photographing everywhere. You know, the 80s, people talk about it being dangerous, and I suppose to a certain extent it was, but I never really felt it. I mean, I never really, you know, I accepted it, and I dealt with it as in the ways that I could, you know, to you know, how you carry yourself in New York. You know, you can get away with a lot. In this case, this picture, this couple was having a fight, and I didn't have my flash on. So I took a couple pictures and I realized it really needs the flash. And it took me about, I don't know, it was a gamble on my part to, you know, dig into my photo bag and put the flash battery on my pants and plug the flash in and all. And that took maybe about a minute, and they hadn't moved a muscle. But there they were having a fight. And of course, he's pleading for something, you know, he's saying something. Dogs is definitely part of my thing from day one in photography. I was always photographing dogs. This is in Washington Square Park. And how lucky to, you know, find this dog who's got his nose up the other one's butt. And what looks very, very phallic, that's right in front of, that's still there today. It's right in front of the, you know, the arch in Washington Square Park. You know, obviously correspondences and, you know, but again, you know, it's, you know, I'm trying to be, you know, quick and make one picture. I'm not, you know, I never used a motor winder. So I never had the opportunity to edit, you know, 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 pictures of the same scene, as they're all pretty much one shots. Believe it or not, that was Macy's window in the middle of the 80s. Pretty risque for Macy's, I would say. And sometimes you just get plain lucky, and to, you know, arrive upon this scene. I did take a picture or two before, but I was, you know, pretty much amazed that that these, you know, three women who looked like they just had their hair done the same way, it looks like pretty much, were standing in front of these three mannequins who were, you know, possibly, you know, younger versions of themselves. Anyway, you make up your own story, is what I always like to say. Well, yeah, New York is, you know, full of questions, and really more questions than answers. It never occurred to me that there might not be a person in there. I didn't honestly know. I really didn't know whether that there was a person in there. I kind of assumed it was, but the reason why this person, if it is a person and not, you know, an art piece, is in a 55-gallon, you know, drum bag, plastic bag, is because that's how homeless people sleep. That was, you know, very common in the East Village where I took this picture. But the noose around the neck, what does that mean? You know, I mean, the noose is, you know, has such a horrible history in America, and whether or not there was a person in there, I mean, clearly, even if it was an art piece, it was saying, you know, essentially living on the street is like being lynched. So, you know, pictures like that are tough. As I said, you know, matters of race. Have you ever seen the opposite of this? Have you ever seen, you know, 4 Black kids and 4 white nannies, you know, being strolled around Soho? No, absolutely not. And you know, I would like to do an art piece that is just that. Again, sometimes you just get lucky, and this was the Reagan era. Greed was good. Maybe this was 84, I think it was. So many people were wearing furs, both men and women. I have no idea about this picture, except, you know, these two guys were having a conversation. I obviously interrupted it. But anyway, New York Street. So again, this is one of those pictures where, you know, you write the story. You know, is it a child, you know, experiencing old age or perceiving old age or mortality itself? You know, for me, the other thing about this one particularly was the line that goes from the woman's bag on the left through the straw, you know, leading directly in. And the fact that, you know, I guess I had the presence of mind to cut the heads off because I didn't want to see any other heads. And I just wanted this to be, you know, a private moment in public space, which was something, you know, that I was always looking for, you know, in the chaos, something very simple and very direct and very emotional. That was on my block in the East Village. So I was fortunate in 1977. If this looks a little like Winogrand, there's a reason. I was fortunate to take a weekend workshop with him in 1977 in Boston. And what Winogrand was so eloquent about was, you know, talking about form and content, and how the best pictures were the ones where the form was threatening to overwhelm the content, or the content was threatening to overwhelm the form. So that kind of rigor is what I wanted to, put in pictures that had, a lot of content, but also a lot of formal arrangement. And as time went on, I realized that content's always content, but form can be content as well. That is to say, a picture that is, really, like Lee Friedlander is a perfect case in point. A picture that is, really beautifully composed in a formal sense has, emotion. It has something that transcends the content, or becomes content, shall we say? Anyway, so that's what I'm out there trying to do. I'm trying to, make these photographs where the tension between form and content is very, very much in play, and there is the sense that it could go either way as a photograph, and assuming in the assumption behind that is that a photograph is something, this comes straight from, Winogrand, but, that a photograph is something that is something new. It's something in and of itself. So yeah, using the flash on the street, and I was, rather bold with it, and I was prepared to deal with, consequences when and if they appeared, and I did do that. There were times when I, could have gotten into trouble. There were times where there was threats, in my direction, infrequently, but I was able to deal with it in most every case, because I feel that people had a right, to blow the flash, in somebody's face, as it can be a startling thing to do. And, I don't do that anymore, but I did do that then. And I had to prepare myself for how I would deal with that. And one of the ways I prepared myself was the sort of maxim that Lisette Modell told Diane Arbus. I read, she asked Lisette Modell, what do I do when, or what if people get angry, when I use the flash and photograph them on the street, and people say, why did you do that? And Lisette Modell's answer was, you say, because you interest me. And of course, that's true. And so I did use that technique a couple of times, and it diffused the situation. Anyway, this represents, an aspect of my work. I was using flash from the beginning. Now, this is another one of those fun pictures that most people assume that the Black kids and the Black woman will go together, but that's actually not the case. The kids came on with the white woman on the left, and then the older woman the Black woman comes on and sees me photographing, and she's trying to hide their face from my camera. She's angry at me for taking a picture. See, as I say, I was pretty balls out in that period of time, and I tried to get away with as much as I could. This one is the cover of my book, and another fun fact emerged. The man on the right was ID'd by his granddaughter, and she saw the picture on the wall at a friend's place of business, and told me that that's her grandfather, and that in the case at his feet is a loaded revolver and probably $30,000 or $40,000 worth of diamonds. He was a diamond cutter in the jewelry district, and he was on his way home to Staten Island, and he was bringing his work with him and had a revolver in there. So that was really amazing to run into her and to hear that story. So, you know, I was really attracted to this New York. I mean, I was raising a kid solo at the time. So, you know, I had to be home at 3 o'clock pretty much most of these years, you know, to meet the bus. So that was the end of my photographing. I would start in the morning around 9 and I'd shoot till around 3. Although sometimes my son could, you know, stay with my parents who lived not far from me, and I could, you know, photograph more. But generally speaking, I know that I say that because I'm on my way home on this train at that time to get home to meet the bus. This poor fellow was, you know, was a Vietnam vet, and he, you know, got his legs blown off in Vietnam, and that's how he got around. This fellow was 7 feet 8 inches tall. It said so on the back of his shirt. That's Shirley Chisholm on the lower right, the first woman to ever run for president, I believe. And this is at the 1980 Democratic Convention in the New York delegation. The man that she's talking to on the bottom, his name was Manfred Orenstein. He was a New York State senator. The Anti-Nuke March, the big Anti-Nuke March on June 12th, 1982 in New York and all over the world. It was actually the largest, it was the largest peace march, anti-nuke march, I guess you would say, in history. The largest march, I believe, in history up to that point anywhere, because it was worldwide. It was like 40 million people marched against nukes. It's time to do that again. A lot of people don't know, but you know, there's a lot of Jews that are against the state of Israel for reasons that we could talk about if you want to know. But this is at the UN, and Hasidim come out there to protest against the state of Israel for routinely. God gave Adam Eve, not Steve. You can't write this stuff. I mean, that's the thing about New York. You know, there's just so much going on, and you know, it's so fertile. You know, a place to photograph. And my approach to photographing on the street was, you know, very free associative. You know, if that light bulb went off and said photograph, I would photograph. And you know, I think I, you know, I ruffled some feathers, but by and large, I always did it in a way that I tried to let the person know that I had to do this. Now, I mean, I know this is very presumptuous on my part, but I tried to exude the vibe. I have to do this. In this case, I had to do that. This photograph, and the couple in the back, the woman has got her hand on her head, arm on her head too, just like the one in the foreground. But the one in the foreground is actually turning away from me. It's not a response to the guy on the street. She's turning away from this maniac running across the street with a camera about to photograph her. I think this is early in my photographic career, so you know, maybe I was a little bit too bold, but another one of those pictures where you don't know what the actual story is, but it is, I'm telling you what the story is. Yeah, hair. And this is Studio 54. I didn't go there much. I was, as I said, I was raising a kid through this whole period. So, you know, I didn't go out that much at night, if at all, for long periods of time. But in this case, I went to Studio 54 And these are people waiting online, hoping to get in, because you had to be chosen at a certain point to get in. In this case, this is another one of these heart-wrenching situations that's got so much beauty attached to it, and horror. The woman, I get a phone call, a message on Facebook from this woman's son, who calls me up, or we talk initially on Facebook, and tells me that's his mother. And he told me about her, and she was in the camps in Auschwitz and Buchenwald, and she was, you know, horrible things happened to her. And he was so grateful to have the picture. But what's crazy about it is that the woman behind her on the left, she's Jewish, the woman behind her on the left is Bess Meyerson. And Bess Meyerson was she was Miss America. So that woman there is Bess Meyerson, and she was Miss America. And that was such a big deal for Jews, because Bess Meyerson was such a beauty, and, you know, the pride that Jews had that a Jewish woman became Miss America. But they don't know each other. She's just there like an angel. You know, it's just total magic. Some of the things that happen in photographs, you know, just the catching of magic, and you don't know it, and then you find it out years later. This is in Boston. This is a Boston picture. And Winogrand liked this picture. I took this picture during a Winogrand workshop, and I put it up in the class, and Winogrand went like this. He hit it with his, that's the way he critiqued. He didn't want to say what made a picture good, or what worked or didn't work, because in his words, he didn't want to upset the muse that allows the magic of photography to happen by talking about it too much. That's at JFK. This was a glam rock group at West Beth, picture I made for the Village Voice. This was made on assignment also for the Boston Phoenix, but I was very fortunate to catch this one, 1984 in San Francisco. And this was on my blog. I shot that with a 420 millimeter lens from the East Village. But how amazing to see, you know, one of the symbols of Islam, you know, touching the two towers of the World Trade Center. And I guess this is the final picture. This is a Boston picture. Again, you know, there's a story here. You know, make it up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. There's a couple of questions that I think are coming from the same place, in terms of the difficulty involved in either photographing a particular subject matter because it's sensitive, or by the use of the flash. And with that being said, it's about the hesitation that some photographers have in terms of photographing, either in a particular way or a particular subject. And you aptly talked about, you know, if you mentioned the response that I have to photograph this, right? That's where you're coming from. So how important is it for a person who wants to do street photography to understand why they're making those photographs? Either to explain to themselves or be able to explain to someone else if they're asked.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my whole thing with this was I wanted to be in a zone of certainty, that there was importance in doing this, in using the flash. I did, probably cross the line, sometimes. I mean, not every picture was great, and not every picture was I fast enough to get what I saw, So, these are interesting, moral, ethical questions. But I think a lot about your demeanor as a photographer is what comes into play, like how you deal with this, very shocking, can be very shocking moment. And I mean, you all know Bruce Gilden. I'm sure you know his work, and I know Bruce, very well. We actually came from the same neighborhood. I know him since we were, like 19, since before either of us were photographers. And I showed him how to use the flash, from the beginning, because he didn't use the flash initially. His pictures in Coney Island and so forth. There's no flash. But I never really got into any trouble. I always tried to, smooth any feathers that were ruffled, and to have a technique that was so quick that I would be in and out and people wouldn't even know it really happened. But as I say, I was prepared to deal with the consequences of doing that. And still it's kind of a crazy thing to do. I like I say, I don't do it anymore, but at the time I just felt like I could do it, and I should do it. And I guess I started off always doing that from day one. So in Boston first, and I was, I'm glad I got away with it, but I never, like I say, I've ruffled some feathers, but I certainly didn't cause any, conniptions, yeah.
There's a question that I think we could pose to all of you. There's a question about defining genres, in terms of street photography, street portraiture, documentary photography, photojournalism. When do you think it's important to think about defining your work to a particular genre? Is it important? And if so, when?
Well, I think photojournalism is when you're on assignment, or you're doing it with the intention of doing it for pitching it to somebody. But I think the other areas, for me, blend over: documentary, street photography, portraits, when it's more of maybe one person or close up. But there's it's synonyms, similar words.
Yeah, I think it all for me sort of like operates in a loop. The stuff that I've shot in those jazz clubs was absolutely influenced by the stuff I shot on the street, and then vice versa. The stuff that I learned shooting in those jazz clubs, I took back out on the street. So I just sort of try to approach it in the same way with the same ideas.
Yeah, I mean, every photograph stops time, and no matter where you are, there's always a moment. There's always, a decisive moment, shall we say, and you want to get that. And that's street, whether you're doing it indoors or on the street, it's a street aesthetic, and it does the thing that the camera does well that our eyes can't do. Our eyes can't stop time.
Right.
Only a camera can stop time, and so it's an extension of seeing. But I mean, every photograph is like that, and it's a mechanical device that can do that. Our eyes can't do that.
I agree. It's a street aesthetic. think that indoor pictures could be even a family situation.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
like jazz.
Yeah.
Well, it is like jazz. It
Right.
is jazz, you know.
Exactly. You have a framework and then you improvise off of that.
Yeah. You know, Miles Davis said, I'll play it and tell you what it is later.
Exactly right.
It's
Yeah.
like, you know, that's where it is. That's, you know,
Yeah.
that's the place that I was always coming from in my work. You know, I'll do it and tell you what it was later.
Right, right. The creation is more important than the naming of it. Yeah.
Exactly. I used to teach at ICP for a lot of years, and I wanted one semester, I wanted to title my class, Shoot First, Ask Questions Later, but they wouldn't allow me to do that because we don't shoot pictures, we make photographs, you know, type of thing, you know. And but it is, you know, it is shooting anyway. So yeah, you know. I mean, I just, you know, it's wonderful to be out there.
Man, it's a great name for a class. I may steal that from you.
Yeah, like you never heard that before, right?
The bulk of all of your archives are based on film. So, but you know, you can scan film and output it to a variety of different mediums using digital output. But that being said, to what degree do you embrace, limit, utilize post-processing in terms of the creation of your prints? I know that, you know, that Meryl still has darkroom and doing prints, but whether you're using analog or digital technologies, you know, how do you see the role of processing, creating print?
They do cross over. None of my, let's say, my slide film would not be seen now if I wasn't scanning it and printing it, because even back then I couldn't afford to do it. I couldn't afford to pay someone $100 to make a print in 1980s. And I did it, and that was it. So digital technology has made that accessible. And yes, I have hard drive full of photographs that I've taken with digital cameras. I just find using my film camera and going back to it sexier. I see it, I know it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely something seductive about the film process. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I was doing digital, more predominantly digital, maybe 5 years ago. But I was still trying to shoot it like I shot film, which is to just shoot and not keep looking at the preview, you know, because that can really disrupt your creative process if you're constantly looking at what you just shot. So I tried to really force myself to just shoot, and then like I would film, like you don't have the opportunity to keep looking at your preview screen. But then I just found maybe 3-4 years ago that carrying around my Leica just felt so damn good. I'm going back to that. So that's what I've been doing.
I did, when I'm looking at your, Gerald, when you showed your Cuba pictures, I was thinking that it's the same eye, the same aesthetic. Didn't even matter if it was black and white. It could have told me it was large format. I think it's like, so people paint and they like a certain sable brush, you know, you like it.
Right.
Or yes. Or when I like, I'm shooting with my phone because that's what I have. I'm not going to stop and go like this.
Right.
You go crazy.
Right. The goal is for it to become an extension of you so that you don't have to think about what you're doing and you're just focused on what's happening in front of you. And that's when you can react to what's going on. If you're constantly worried about how you're operating your camera, then you'll miss all the stuff happening.
And a final question for all of you. Some of the people who are watching today, either live or going to see this later, they're interested in street photography, but you know, their response is, I want to do it, but I don't live in New York. I'm not going to be traveling to Cuba soon. How can I possibly make images as interesting as yours? So if that's the quandary they're facing, what suggestions could you each provide them to encourage them to go out and still make photographs?
there's something special right where you are right now. I mean, look at the difference between Richard, mine, and Gerald of the same city. They look totally different.
Hmm.
And nobody's gonna you could be capturing the quiet moments. And it's if you have a temptation, think that you want to, just do it. It's not like you're getting up on a microphone and you have a really bad voice. That hurts people, but you could you're not gonna hurt anyone with a photograph, and you'll edit, not everyone has to be a perfect note.
All right.
You obviously have the desire. So that's enough reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are parts in, LA that where people congregate. I'm thinking of downtown LA. You'll find lots of people on the street in downtown LA. Santa Monica, you'll find people. So, I mean, you just have to find some spot where people are, in large numbers and figure it out from there. But, even as spread out and as car oriented as LA is, you'll find spots there that, will have people.
Or small town America.
Right. Oh, and that guy from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Cohen. I mean, yeah, incredible images. And I've been to Wilkes-Barre. There ain't nothing going on in Wilkes-Barre, but he finds it. Okay, so
yeah. How about you, Richard?
Well, you can make pictures wherever you are, and if you're in a place where there's not a lot of population, wait till theaters get out, or go to the mall, or whatever. There you can go anywhere where there's people and shoot if it's your passion, as Joseph Campbell said. Follow your passion.
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, thank you all for sharing your work and your time. I feel just honored just to be on the same digital stage with you guys for the last hour and a half. So thank you, and thank you again for sharing your work. And Brandon, hand it off back to you.
Thank you, Ibarionex. Thank you as well for your time and for your expertise. Just echoing what Ibarionex said, I would like to thank all of our speakers for tonight.